Oh, hello. Hey, how you doing? Steve the Amateur Historian. Just recently shaved my face, which may have been a bad decision because it's cold out here and my face is feeling it, but my seasonal allergies are finally starting to kick in. Having to blow my nose a lot, and just my hair getting scruffy, my face catching on fire. Just a lot of nonsense in this life. So, clean shaved, kind of regretting it. But anyway, I'm out here. I'm out here in the world. More specifically, I'm in the kind of PSU neighborhood. A bunch of Portland State buildings just kind of scattered behind me. Just kind of right in the middle of all this educational insanity. There was a pretty brutal murder that happened here, so that's why I am in this vicinity today on a fresh episode of Historic Murders of Portland. I'm walking directly towards 4th Avenue, that's this crossing street, between College Street and Hall around the corner, where these food carts are now today. This location was once the site of the home of Eunice Freeman. So it's August 15th, 1919. Eunice Freeman's home, I think it was an apartment house. It's literally located like right over here, right past me, along 4th Avenue. And on the morning of the 15th, she was found dead. She was lying on the floor. Her skull had been completely fractured, and there was a big gas pipe sitting on the floor right next to her. So it was pretty easy to determine rather quickly that Eunice Freeman had died as a result of being attacked by someone. Someone with this big gas pipe had literally just come in. There was no signs of a struggle, so it seems like she was snuck up on, which either would lead one to believe that there was an intruder in the house that she didn't know was there, that was able to sneak up on her unknowingly, or somebody was there that she knew, that she thought she could trust, that she felt comfortable with, and in a moment where she wasn't paying attention, that individual came up and attacked her. And her next door neighbor noticed that right around the time of her death, she was killed close to 9 a.m. the morning of the 15th, and one of her next door neighbors said that they saw a Clarence Johnson leaving her place around that same time. I think a little bit after, possibly, but right around the same time, so you couldn't know for certain. And another neighbor of hers, because again it's an apartment house, the street's lined with apartment houses, so there's people all over the place to see whatever's going on in your life, as opposed to now where it's just, college buildings. And another witness said that pretty close to the time where it seems Eunice Freeman was killed, this other neighbor, a Miss Jolly, as she's mentioned in the paper, she said that she looked out her window. I'm guessing she lived across the street, so she would have lived in a structure that's like right here, pretty much where I am. And she saw a man in the window of Eunice Freeman's, her particular room. And the guy that she saw, kept coming back to the window and kind of looking out and looking around. He looked really edgy and shaky. And it seemed like she was also a witness to this Clarence Johnson that her other neighbor had seen leaving her place. And the reason that her neighbors knew Clarence Johnson was a reoccurring fixture here at Eunice Freeman's home. Clarence Freeman had gone to San Quentin in 1960 for I think it's assault with intent to murder or something like that, something real rough around the edges. So he went to prison in 1916, and he was paroled in 1919, just a couple of months before Eunice Freeman's death. And Eunice Freeman was instrumental in getting him off. It's very interesting in the information that I found. Eunice Freeman, she's kind of a middle-aged woman. I don't know if she's just got money to throw around and she's kind of bored and discontent with her life, but it seems like this was a regular thing for her, was trying to get prison inmates paroled by helping them out, because it's just strange. I don't really know. They don't really describe much of what their past dynamic was between Freeman and Johnson. But there she was in 1919 doing her best to convince the parole board to let him go. And he was paroled just a couple months before this murder. So you'd think he's probably a fairly grateful gentleman. And as a parolee, it's hard enough to get your life going again nowadays as a parolee. It was probably equally as hard in 1919. So Clarence Johnson gets freed. He probably doesn't really have anywhere to go, anyone to stay with, and he ultimately ends up coming north to Portland and staying with Eunice Freeman at her place. So you venture to feel okay for the guy, like, okay, maybe it was an accident, this thing he run, maybe they're making too much out of an attempted murder. Come on, was it really that bad? And then this woman helps him out, and he comes and he lives with her, and he's probably helping her out. Maybe he gets some odd jobs, helps her pay the bills a little bit by staying with her. He's showing his appreciation for her, helping him get out of prison, so on and so forth. So, it's, you want to feel okay for the guy, but at the same time, you have witnesses saying they saw him at her place around the time it seems she was beaten to death with a gas pipe. Well, we later find out via Clarence Johnson himself, because in the aftermath of the murder victim cannot say her part. Clarence Johnson would go on to say, she helped get me out, she helped get me paroled, I'm back out on the streets, and I come north and start living at her place, which again, right down the road here, in the kind of the PSU neighborhood where all those food carts are. And, it seems like he's just going to stay with her for a bit till he can get back on his feet. However, according to him, Eunice Freeman started becoming very, very enamored of him, almost to the point of obsession. He claimed that, she was driving him crazy. She was trying to constantly get him to, take her out and do stuff with her. And it became pretty obvious to him that she was obsessively in love with him. And I believe he was almost half her age. She was almost 60, and he was 30, 31 years old. And he wasn't interested in cultivating a romance of any kind with this woman. But it creates a problem for him, because this woman was instrumental in getting him his freedom, which means she could be instrumental in having it taken away again. And I think that started becoming a major concern for Clarence Johnson, and she probably threw that in his face. Anytime he wasn't forthcoming, or every time he didn't want to, bow to her every request. It was like, oh, well, wouldn't it be unfortunate if I contacted the parole board and had your parole revoked because you didn't, show your full appreciation of me? So this guy's stuck. He wouldn't be free if it wasn't for this woman, but now it's almost he can't get away. He's stuck. He's either got to accept that his life is going to be fully... It's just all going to be about appeasing her and her desires and wants out of literal blackmail, or he can end up going back to prison, potentially, by having his parole revoked. Sorry about the loud noise. So anyway, they've been working on this place forever. So anyway, we have a potential motive now for Clarence Johnson to kill Eunice Freeman. She's the one thing standing between him and total freedom. So, pretty quickly, he's nabbed, or not really, but pretty quickly he came under fire as the suspect. However, the problem was, in the immediate aftermath of this killing, and once Clarence Johnson became the primary suspect, all of a sudden nobody could find him, and it seemed that he had split town. And as I'm crossing this is Interstate 405, I'm still walking along 4th Avenue, So Eunice Freeman's house would have been literally, as I point, directly this way. You can almost see it, like literally like 3 blocks this way. And at the time of the killing, because Johnson had been living with her for a while, but as she became more and more grabby and obsessive, he ended up moving out, which probably didn't help in relation to trying to avoid having Eunice Freeman go back to the parole board and change her mind. But from right this way, about 3 or 4 blocks, the place where Clarence Johnson was staying was right here where this Travelodge hotel is now. So, literally, like, you can't really, because you're a GoPro that I'm recording this on, but right through here, like, directly where my finger's pointing, would have been roughly where Eunice Freeman's place was, just past that green light. And then right here is where Clarence Johnson was living at the time of the murder. And on the day that Eunice Freeman was killed, it was acknowledged, I think it was the daughter or the stepdaughter of the proprietor of, I think it was a rooming house that was actually here, had said that, they saw Clarence Johnson leave in the morning, presumably to go to Eunice Freeman's place where he was, seen by witnesses. And at a time seemingly shortly after, right after the murder, within minutes, because it would only take a couple minutes for him to run back to his place here, he returns to the place he's staying at here. And he seems to be in a rush. He's packing things up. He's looking very suspicious. And I'm going to try not to get killed. And one of the things that he was seen doing while he was back at his place over here was one of the proprietors saw him stuffing something. Couldn't tell exactly what it was, but they saw him stuffing something into his stove and turning the stove on to burn it. He was destroying something. So there's another red flag in terms of this guy possibly being the guilty party. And they said that his room smelled like he burnt a rag of some kind. Who knows? Maybe it was a rag that he used to wipe her blood off of him. Who knows? But essentially, the last time in the immediate aftermath of the murder of Eunice Freeman that Clarence Johnson is seen in Portland was coming back to his place that was located here where this Travelodge is, and then taking off. And all of a sudden, nobody had any clue where he was. So, guilty. I mean, the guy split town. He's seen at her place right around the time of the killing. He's acting suspicious in his rooming house immediately after. He has absolute motivation to kill this woman. And then he left the state. He literally went north into Washington, into Seattle. He ultimately made it all the way to Alaska. And he was actually tracked down in Nome, Alaska, which even today is just this tiny little hub on the edge of the state. So he managed to get really far away before authorities finally tracked him down. So upon being brought back to Portland, they probably wanted a first-degree murder charge because it seemed like this was motivated, possibly premeditated. But at the same time, it was one of those situations where you couldn't really determine if it really was premeditated or if he was... Because it seemed like there was evidence that she was threatening to blackmail him, but he was trying his best to just convince her not to do it, which she never fully agreed to. And she apparently had gone on a trip to California. Of course, San Quentin's in California. And this happened shortly before the murder, and I think Clarence Johnson got really concerned that she maybe went to San Quentin and said something to them while she was down in California. All he knew is that she went to California. He didn't know why or where exactly she went. So I think he was getting very nervous, very desperate, very frightened that he'd be apprehended and returned to prison at any moment. So I think that was ringing in his head. And the interesting thing is when he's apprehended and brought back, he openly admits to planning on killing another woman. there was a woman named Melva Williams who lived at 4th and Alder, way off in the mix of downtown over here. And apparently this was a woman that he actually was romantically involved in. He had feelings for her the way that Eunice Freeman wished he had for her. And apparently she did to him what he was doing to Eunice Freeman. She kind of threw him aside and said she was going to go off and probably marry another man, and that filled him with rage, and so he was planning on killing her. But for whatever reason, maybe he showed up at her place. I don't know the specifics surrounding that case. That was kind of secondary information as far as the papers were concerned. And it's so interesting because it seems like he was planning on killing this one woman, which thank God he didn't, and then he was going to try to talk things through with Eunice Williams, and potentially one of his primary motives in going to see her was to ask her, hey, what did you do while you were down in California? Did you throw me under the bus while you were down there? And by his account, which of course that's all we have because Eunice Freeman ain't around anymore, by his account, he went there out of desperation to get her to promise that you won't, contact the parole board and change your mind and have me sent back to prison. And she had him on the hook, and she just refused to do it. It wouldn't surprise me if she was very manipulative about it, because it seems like she was a little crazy and she was obsessed with trying to get him to love her. So as he's desperately telling her, please don't do this, she's just like, well, I don't know. What are you going to do for me, lover boy? God, that's frightening to think about. So, by his account, she won't do it. She's probably being very condescending towards him, which just spikes his crazed rage and desperation even more. And he says that he grabbed the gas pipe, of course not with the intention of actually killing her with it, but he grabs the gas pipe as a way of being like, threatening. Are you going to promise me? And apparently she once again refused to make that promise that she wouldn't contact the parole board. And he snapped a little further and went forward and attacked her, beat her in the head with this gas pipe. Just a horribly painful way to go. Something where, she probably survived for a little while afterwards, but to what extent, like what pain must she have been going through in that aftermath. And then, of course, as seen by neighbors, that explains why one neighbor sees him. He's constantly looking out the window. He's looking kind of nervous and tense. That could have either been in the immediate aftermath of the murder or right before. He was tense that whole time. And then another witness sees him leaving the apartment house Freeman lived in, right around the time she's reportedly murdered. It all came together, and it was just so interesting. He fled for it. He was willing to kill a woman to stay out of prison. Then he gets apprehended, and not only does he admit to doing the killing, but he admits to planning on killing another woman. So it seems like by the time of his apprehension, he wasn't quite as desperate to stay out of prison. And he was ultimately charged second-degree murder, and convicted on that charge. Again, I think it was second-degree murder as opposed to first-degree because you couldn't quite... The motive was there, but they just couldn't quite fully determine that this was planned ahead of time, despite the possible motivations. I think it was one of those things where they were worried about a jury letting him off on a first-degree murder beef. So they went for a second, and that probably made things a little bit easier on the jury, and they got what they wanted. At least the judicial system got essentially what they wanted out of the whole thing. And so Clarence Johnson went back to prison, where the whole thing started. It was Eunice Freeman and him being introduced, acquaintanced, while he was in prison in San Quentin. So, in a disturbing, macabre way, it comes full circle. And that is the story of the brutal beating murder of Eunice Freeman, who lived here in what is now the PSU neighborhood. So as always, gang, remember to like, share, subscribe. Hit up my Patreon if you so choose. The link is always in the description. And till next time, from the PSU neighborhood, this has been Steve, the amateur historian, with another episode of Historic Murders of Portland.